Ireland, mythical, magical, mystical. A Guide to Hidden Ireland. The Hidden Gems Series. By Christy Nicholas. Part 1 of 4. 4th edition 2024. Copyright 2013 Christy Nicholas. Cover art 2022 by Get Covers. Narrated by Éire. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced in any form or by any electronic or mechanical means, including information storage and retrieval systems, except in the case of brief quotations embodied in critical articles or reviews, without permission in writing from its publisher, Green Dragon Publishing. The characters and events portrayed in this book are fictitious or are used fictitiously. Any similarity to real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental and not intended by the author. All brand names and product names used in this book are trademarks, registered trademarks, or trade names of their respective holders. Green Dragon Publishing is not associated with any product or vendor in this book. Published by Green Dragon Publishing. Beacon Falls, Connecticut. www.greendragonartist.com. Introduction. What comes to your mind when you hear the word Ireland? Perhaps you envision fairies dancing around a mushroom circle in eerie starlight? Enormous pints of Guinness lined up on an antique wooden bar? Men with jaunty caps riding wooden carts pulled by tired donkeys? Every person has a different impression, a different idea and ideal, when they think of a particular place. Ireland itself has such a varied past and present that the images conjured up are many-faceted, like a huge emerald, glinting bits of its life into each aspect of your mind and memory. I've been to Ireland several times, and it holds a special place in my heart and in my head. Ireland is Monam an Bháile, my soul's home, in Irish. It is a place I feel comforted, warm, and welcome. I wish to share some of this peace and serenity with others. Please, feel free to join me in my journey through Ireland, its history, mystery, and magic. In this book, I will explore many aspects of Ireland. It possesses a rich mythical and historical culture, and a great part of this culture relates to the magic of the land and its people. There have been, and remain, many mystical parts of the island, but the people are what make Ireland what it is today. Of course, music is also an integral part of the culture. I will explore some stunning landscapes and architecture for the photo bugs and will then explore some of the practical aspects of travel in Ireland. I have listed some advice on ways to save money while on your journey and delved into some hidden places which most tourists pass by. In the back of the book, you will find several maps and resources to help with further research and information. Please, enjoy your journey through my book. And, if I have convinced you to travel to this magical place, please let me know. I think everyone should visit Ireland and be enriched by its incredible sense of the mystical, magical, and mythical. The mythical facet. History and mythtery. Much of Irish history is shrouded in the mists of time and oral tradition. Therefore, much of what we know, or what we think we know, is classified as myth, as we have virtually no written evidence of the tales. The written sources we do have are sometimes unreliable as to historical accuracy and were most often transcribed from oral tradition by monks. These monks were probably torn between recording the local culture and discouraging belief in the pagan gods and traditions of this land. Therefore, they very likely colored the myths with Christian sensibility. Evidence exists suggesting many of the human legendary heroes were once worshipped as gods in their own right. Historically, people arrived in Ireland between 10,500 and 8,000 BCE, shortly after the last miniature ice age covered the island in glaciers, though some recent evidence dates back to as long as 33,000 years ago. These Neolithic hunter-gatherers wandered the land, living off its bounty. Several waves of invaders came over the centuries, the final major one being the Celts from the Iberian Peninsula. Vikings and Normans came later, but the essential genetic makeup of the people of Ireland was already set. In his book called Saxons, Vikings, and Celts, Brian Sykes describes his work on the DNA of Ireland and the UK. He is a genetic archaeologist, looking for clues of migration patterns in different areas of the British Isles and Ireland using genetic markers in today's population as compared to those of discovered skeletons in the areas, such as a 12,000-year-old skeleton in Cheddar, England. It was fascinating reading, and proved, genetically, Celts and Picts, the race in Scotland before the Gaels arrived, were the same race. As such, they likely had a common set of beliefs and language, back before the seas rose and cut the islands from each other. However, we shall leave Scotland to another book and concentrate on our Emerald Isle. So much for proven history, and on to the fun part. There are several cycles, sets of tales, about prehistoric Ireland. The mythological cycle, or Book of Invasions, tells tales of the various invasions of the land. The Ulster cycle tells tales of heroic acts by kings and champions in Ulster and Connaught. The Fenian cycle does the same for the folk of Leinster and Munster. The historical cycles are a bardic tradition of the history, or mythology, of the kings of Ireland. While going into extensive detail about each cycle is beyond the scope of this book, I will delve into some of the more interesting points, so as to ground you in the essence of each. The mythological cycle. The mythological cycle is mostly comprised of a set of tales known as Leber Gabla Éire, the Book of Invasions or the Book of Conquests, and is, like the other tales of Ireland, filled with politics, battle, love, magic, and outrageous tales of feats of strength and revenge. It recounts, via myth and story, the invasions of the different peoples of Ireland over the course of its history. How closely these invasions are rooted in reality we may never know. However, once we reach the invasion of the sons of Mil, sometime before 100 BCE, we start getting into territory which is corroborated by archaeological evidence. These are the Celtic tribes who migrated from northern Spain. The earliest renditions of these tales seem to have come from the 8th to 11th century and are therefore heavily influenced by this later Christian ideal, but still manage to retain some of their pre-Christian magic. Other parts of the mythological cycle are made up of the metrical Dinshenkas, or lore of places, and other standalone tales such as the Dream of Angus, the Wooing of Edain, and the Tragedy of the Children of Éire. If you want a delightful rendition of these tales, I highly recommend the Celtic Myth Pods How. Hosts Ruth and Gary Colcombe create many engaging dramatizations of these tales on their show and bring the stories to life. But let us go back into the time before history, of land before remembering, and tales before writing. I have included a small list of names in their English versions and Irish versions in the appendix, for easier reading later on. Go back into the mists of time, a time before writing, a time before people, a time before the island of Ireland had seen its first people. The mists start to rise, showing the green, rolling hills, covered in trees, deer, and nothing more. Éire. The tales tell of the first people to set foot on Ireland. Noah's granddaughter, Éire, arrives on Ireland's emerald shores with one ship, 49 other women, and 3 men. Like chattel, the women are divided among them. Evidently the gods are not pleased by this. These groups were to populate the island, but a deluge comes along and washes away all but one man, Fintan mac Bachra. Fintan lives for a further 5,500 years in several animal guises, shifting from one animal to another as each life is completed, gaining wisdom and stories. He becomes an honored Sínchai, or storyteller, for Ireland, and this becomes an archetype in many tales. Partholin. 300 years later, another descendant of Noah and Imzara settles in Ireland with his people and 3 sons, having come from Greece or Anatolia. They live in peace and prosperity for 10 years. However, they are then set upon by the evil Fulmor, a race of seafarers from Tory Island. While they win, they are then killed off by a mysterious sickness, and all die but one, Tuan mac Carroll. Tuan, like Fintan, spends many lives as different animals, and becomes a storyteller of great renown and wisdom. There is definitely a theme running here, explaining the wealth of tales and wisdom in the oral tradition. It also sets a tradition of honoring the elderly, those that have seen things in their life, and pass on that wisdom to the young. The Irish honor their elderly and wise, and invaders aren't very lucky, it seems. Niamh. The people of Niamh, or Nemd, a relative of Partholin, come by 30 years later. Once again, the Fulmhar battle them. They win, but a subsequent sea battle floods Ireland and most of the Nemedians die. The few survivors are dispersed around the world. Don't worry, they come back. Fulmhar. The Fulmhar, or Fulmharians, were a magical race of beings thought to be semi-divine, roughly equivalent to the concept of chaos, such as the Titans in Greek mythology or the frost giants in Norse mythology. They were opposed to a later group of immigrants, the Tuatha Dé Danann, and were part of many conflicts with them. They may represent the gods of the pre-Celtic people of Ireland, demonized for modern consumption. Fir Bolg. 250 years after the scattering of the Nemedians, some of the descendants return to Ireland and are separated into three groups: the Fir Bolg, the Fir Domnan, and the Gaelioin. They are only in charge for 37 years before the next invasion, perhaps the most famous one, that of the Tuatha Dé Danann. They don't encounter the Fulmhar. The Fir Bolg are also frequently demonized, as anyone who opposed the fair folk were in Irish stories. They are sometimes described as ugly, misshapen, and of evil countenance, gross caricatures of the beautiful fair folk. They were seen as unfair, warlike, devious, and greedy. It is thought that the name Fir Bolg came from men of the bag. Tuatha Dé Danann. Yet another group of Nemedian descendants came from the far north. Most stories describe them as shining, beautiful, tall, and magical. The elves of Tolkien are thought to derive from the stories of this race. They are skilled in magic and art, and they arrive giving battle to the Fir Bolg. They drive the tribe to the outer islands, but their king, Nuada, loses his hand in battle. Under Irish tradition, no man with a blemish can be king, so he retires, and the kingship is given to Bress, who is half Fulmhar. Bress rules unfairly, extracting heavy taxes and offering wretched hospitality, a high crime in Irish eyes. Nuada sees this and wants to help his people again. He asks his physician to fashion a shining silver hand to replace the one he lost when his hand was severed. Bress is forced to step down, and Nuada is once again king. However, the Fulmhar still exact a crippling tax upon the Tuatha Dé Danann, 2/3 of their annual harvest and cattle, so they are still an oppressed people. Bress, in a huff of discontent, goes over to his father's people, the Fulmhar, and asks for their help in taking back his kingship. His father realizes his son has been a poor ruler, saying he couldn't keep it by justice, he should therefore not take it by force. Instead, being the spoiled brat he is, Bress goes to King Baelor of the Evil Eye, who has the power to kill with his gaze. Baelor raises his forces and invades the Tuatha lands. The battle goes back and forth between the two over many days, but finally Baelor is killed by Luff of the Long Arm, and nicknamed Éire due to his exceptional skill with the spear. Luff is a princeling who is Baelor's own grandson and fulfilling a prophecy. He was raised away from his family, and taught all the skills of a king's court, to guard, sing, dance, sew, cook, etc. The prophecy said he would kill Baelor, and he does. Luff shoots a mighty slingshot at Baelor, and, like David, defeats the giant foe. This is also quite reminiscent of Oedipus Rex, and the futility of trying to derail prophecy. After this mighty battle, Tuatha Dé Danann live in peace. Well, as much as the Irish ever live in peace, for 150 years. Sons of Mill. In the north of Spain, a Celtic tribe is restless, looking for greener pastures. Their land is drying out, and crops are no longer lush enough to support them. A man named sees Ireland from atop a tower on a clear day and braves the rough seas to discover what he may see. He discovers a land rich and green, filled with animals and arable land. He travels inland and comes in contact with the Tuatha De Danann during a dispute on the hill of Tara. He helps them solve a problem between the chieftains by convincing each they were fairly treated by the others. However, as part of this resolution, he waxes lyrical of the bounty of the land, and the locals fear he wants Ireland for himself, so they follow him back and attack him. He dies on the return to Iberia. His family, sons of his uncle, Mill, come back to Ireland to avenge his death. They are greeted by 3 sisters when they arrive. Each is lovely, tall, and elegant. Many religions have triple goddesses in their pantheon, and this is one of several in the Celtic myths. Each sister is a queen of Ireland, and they rule 1 year in 3, as their husbands do as king. They are Banba, Fodla, and Éire, and each demands their name be the name of the island. The poet of the Milesians, Amergin the bard, promises each this will be true if they are victorious. The Milesians make an agreement with the Tuatha De Danann. They are to get back in their ships and sail out into the ocean for a distance of 9 waves. When they try to return, the druids of the Tuatha conjure up mighty storms and mists so they cannot land. Each time the boat tries to get close to the shore, the wind, rain, and fog forces them back beyond the 9th wave. The Milesians circle the island 3 times until, finally, Amergin dispels the storms with powerful poetry, called the Song of Amergin. This poem, or song, calms the waters, quiets the winds, and scatters the fog so the Milesians can finally land. The 2 armies do battle, and while the Tuatha De Danann have magic, the Milesians have cold steel, something the Tuatha De Danann cannot abide, so they are defeated. An agreement is made between the 2 powerful races. The Tuatha De Danann are given the world beneath the surface, giving rise to the legends of the Sidhe, the fairy folk, the Fae. To this day, one must not disturb a fairy mound, or risk the wrath of the fair folk beneath. This is the point in the legends where history becomes part of the myth. We have started discovering archaeological evidence, historical records, and at least some verification of the tales of the Irish after this point. Genetic evidence connects the Galician tribes of Spain with the pre-Norman Irish, and digs have found numerous belongings, trade goods and burial artifacts to corroborate this particular tale of migration. The Ulster Cycle. This cycle of tales is also called the Ulead Cycle, or the Red Branch Cycle, and has sagas of heroes in the eastern Ulster and northern Leinster regions. These are the tales to stir a man's blood to heroic acts, to fight off armies with one arm tied behind their back, to vanquish dragons, to leap tall buildings with a single bound, well, perhaps not that. But they are stories that are told to emphasize the good and the bad in all men, that all acts of bravery and foolishness have consequences. The main characters in these tales are King Conchobar, Cuchulainn, Deirdre, and Queen Maeve. They supposedly take place in the first half of the 1st century CE, though there is some evidence that parts of the tales occur later. The most famous of the tales is the Tain Bo Cuailnge, translated as the Cattle Raid of Cooley. And, while the mythological cycle was almost entirely populated by supernatural beings, there is only the occasional peppering of divine or semi-divine players in this cycle, perhaps a holdover of the ancient gods, perhaps an honoring of the Tuatha De Danann. The tales talk of the births of heroes, wooings and elopements, legendary feasts, bitter rivalries and battles, cattle raids, and of course, deaths. At this time in Ireland, there was no High King. The country was divided into major areas: Munster in the south, Connaught in the west, Ulster in the north, Leinster in the east, and Meath in the centre. Sometimes one person was king over an entire region. More often, it was made up of multiple, smaller kingdoms and fiefs. Seldom was there peace, as minor warlords and kings were constantly fighting to gain power and resources. A king's dearest advisor was his druid, who went through decades of training to memorize the oral traditions of history, Brehon law, music, and the magic of the trees. Some scholars see these tales as purely imaginary, while others see them as mostly historical. We may never know how much truth there is to them. I prefer to believe these tales merely reflected the romance and heroics of the age. King Conchobar. King Concobar ruled Ulster from Evan-Macha. This was a fortress on a hill, or a dun, near modern Armagh, and now known as Navan Fort. It was a center for government and magic through much of this age, a place where people met, came for justice, and worshipped the gods. The name means twins of Macha, the goddess of war, fertility, and horses. She was one of the aspects of the Morrigan, another triple goddess in the pantheon. Concobar's mother manipulates many people with adultery, bribery, and trickery to make her son king. Usually, in tales such as the Greek and Roman myths, such underhanded means of gaining power is paid back in kind. However, in Irish myth this is not always the case. She gets him a temporary kingship, but once he is crowned, he is wise and fair enough that the people keep him, and the old king flees. Concobar is also well known for having many wives and many lovers and reserving the right to bed brides on their wedding night. This may be where the concept of prime noctis, or first night, the right of a lord to take a bride on her wedding night, becomes popular in Celtic culture, though despite the movie, Braveheart, this was never a true policy. Cuchulainn. Cuchulainn is a hero of semi-divine birth, the son of Deichdan, daughter of Concobar mac Nessa, king of Ulster, and Luff, the Shining One, the sun god of Irish myth. His name is originally Satanta, but after he kills a hound owned by the blacksmith, Cuchulainn, in self-defense, he vows to guard the smith in place of the hound until a new one can be raised. Cu is the Irish word for hound, so he is thereafter known as Cuchulainn, the Hound of Cuchulainn. There are many wondrous tales of Cuchulainn, tales of heroism and foolishness, tales of battle and lust. He is Ireland's premier hero, the hero against whom all deeds are measured, and all bravery is compared. He is often shown as an Irish version of the Greek hero, Achilles, and his berserker rage could have been the inspiration for the Hulk stories. As a young man, Cuchulainn trains with Scathack, a warrior woman who lives on the Isle of Skye in Scotland, and who runs a fighting school. He fathers a son with the warrior woman, Aoife. The son is named Conla and is featured in other stories in this cycle. Cuchulainn also learns the art of berserker rage, which leads to much trouble and heartache throughout his stories. He has a magical spear from Scathack, the Heabalg, which wins many battles for him, but which is also the instrument of his death. More about Cuchulainn later, though. Deirdre of the Sorrows. This famous Irish romance recounts the tale of Deirdre, whose name means broken-hearted and sorrowful, and the sons of Uisneach. Uisneach is the geographical center of Ireland, and a sacred place of kings. When Deirdre is born, the Druid foretells she will be the fairest woman in the land but will bring great sorrow if she were to marry a king. Deirdre is described as dark of hair, white of skin, and red of lips. For her protection, she is brought up in a fort, apart from all men but Concobar and her foster father. Concobar has his eye on her from the moment the Druid foretold her great beauty. However, as is typical of such a situation, she doesn't want to marry him and dreams of a younger husband. She tells her nurse of her dreams, describes her imagined love of raven hair and young heart. The nurse tells her the man of her dreams was Noisi, one of the sons of Uisneach. He is a cousin to Cuchulainn and a warrior of the Red Branch. Deirdre decides she must have this young man and puts a guise or spell upon him. He, of course, falls in love with her and with the help of his two brothers, he steals her away. They travel all over the land, evading capture by the enraged Concobar. Eventually they escape to Scotland and get married. The king of the Picts in Scotland is jealous of this great beauty, and wants Deirdre for himself, so off they go again. Concobar sends a message to Deirdre and Noisi, saying he is offering peace, and they believe him. Naturally, they are met by treachery, as most of these tales do, and Deirdre is brought to the king, while the brothers are killed. Others hear of this terrible treachery and attack, and many men on both sides die, rendering the prophecy true, despite all the attempts to circumvent it. Deirdre laments the loss of her love and wastes away for a year. She then commits suicide, ending a tragic tale of love, betrayal, and hopelessness. Queen Maeve. Queen Maeve is a wonderful character in Irish myth. A strong, willful woman who has power in her own right. While she makes many poor decisions, ruled by pride and rage, she is a far cry from the meek, submissive females in many other mythologies. Maeve rules Connacht with her husband, Éire Mac Mata. It is possible she was once married to Conchobar. She is a very strong-willed queen, by all accounts fiery and demanding. She wanted to rule equally, and when Conchobar refuses, she leaves him and goes to Connacht and is often understood to be a patron goddess of the land of Ireland. She frequently takes lovers to her bed. Some may be familiar with Shakespeare's homage to her, as Queen Mab, in his immortal play, Romeo and Juliet. Like Cuchulainn, there are many tales of this strong woman. Tain Bo Coln, or the cattle raid of Cooley. This is a tale full of boasting and pride, and the downfalls of such sins. King Éire boasts to his wife, Queen Maeve, that his white bull is the best bull in all of Ireland. Maeve is therefore goaded into getting a better one. A brown bull which belongs to an Ulster chieftain, Dara Mac Factna. Dara is unwilling to sell or rent the bull, so Maeve decides she will have to steal it. As her army approaches Ulster, the opposing warriors of the Red Branch suffer from a curse of weakness, all except Cuchulainn. He raids and uses guerrilla tactics to slow the army before it arrives and demoralizes it greatly. Finally, he agrees to meet, champion against champion, with his former teacher, Fergus, who is in command of Queen Maeve's army. The two heroes fight the duel, day after day, matched equally in strength and prowess. Each night they sleep and dream. After several days of duels, Cuchulainn meets the war goddess, the Morrigan, who is disguised as a young woman. He refuses her sexual advances, and she harries and wounds him during his duels. His father, Luff, sickened by this inequality, agrees to take his place in the duels, and wins until his son is healed. Maeve's raid is eventually a success. However, while the warriors of the Red Branch are still suffering from their curse, their sons pick up arms and are slaughtered by Maeve's army. This throws Cuchulainn into a berserker frenzy and he kills 70 warriors. When Maeve finally brings the brown bull to Connacht, it fights the white bull, and they both die. The moral? Greed and pride are sins, punishable by loss and humiliation, and those who fight with honor and show kindness can win in the end. The Ulster cycle is full of heroism, treachery, love, and death. It seems to be too much drama to be contained within one lifetime, and perhaps it is simply a conglomeration of tales throughout Irish history, attached to known characters to make the tales more interesting. They do, however, nicely sum up the culture of the pre-Christian Irish. Warlike, proud, headstrong, and passionate. It also emphasizes that the wealth of the people lay in their cattle and their battle prowess. And that these tales are passed back and forth like a mug of ale. The Fenian cycle. Also known as the Ossianic cycle, this set of tales centers on the hero Finn mac Cúchail and his warriors in a band called the Fianna. They are formed by Cormac mac Éire, then High King of Ireland, to protect the kingdom. They fight off invaders in the summer and enjoy the hospitality of those they protect in the winter. Some of the tales deal with the excesses of this enjoyment and the follies that derive from those excesses. Finn is studying with a poet and accidentally touches the roasting salmon of knowledge, despite the poet's instructions not to touch it. When his finger is burned, he puts it in his mouth, thus tasting the salmon and receiving all its wisdom. In a similar tale, Merlin, or Myrddin, of Wales, does the same thing. He is then admitted into the court of the High King at Tara and becomes the leader of the clan Baskna. Using a magical harp which rendered all helpless, he kills a creature which terrorized the court every Samhain. As a result, he is made leader of the Fianna. He marries a woman, Sive, who had been under a spell in the guise of a fawn. She is human when in his house at the Dun of Allen, but she is tempted out one day, turns into a fawn and bounds away among the hills of Ireland. They never find her, but they do find a boy who had been raised by a faun, Oisin. They believe this boy to be Siva's son. Oisin becomes a legendary bard and is the narrator of the tales of this cycle. The historical cycle. These tales are also called the cycles of the kings, and, logically enough, contain tales of the kings of Ireland, such as Cormac mac Airt, Neil of the Nine Hostages, Con of the 100 Battles, and Brian Boruma mac Kennedig. These tales would have been created and memorized by the Druids and handed down for teaching the folk of Ireland. The Druids did not write tales down, but spoke them with great feats of memory. These kings range from mainly mythological kings, such as Labraid Loingsec, around 430 BCE, to Brian Boru, who is entirely historical, around 980 CE. Many of the tales were written down only in Christian times, and thus many have likely been colored with Christian tints to make them more palatable to the monks. This is true of all the cycles, and we may never know what the original tales were like. A most popular tale is of Sweeney, a pagan king who is awakened one morning by a bell. Searching for this rude interruption of his slumber, he finds a newly built church. In a rage, he breaks the bell, which angers the church fathers, who put a curse on him. He goes insane and becomes like a bird, flitting about, and eventually dies a broken man, ironically, under the care of a kind churchman. This tale may be one of many inspirations for the Lancelot tales in the King Arthur stories. Recorded history. After the mythological cycles above, there was actual true and mostly verifiable recorded history. This would cover the period of the Age of Saints on, roughly the 5th century CE and forward. The Christian monks may have corrupted the pagan tales with their own view, but at least they wrote many of them down, and continued to keep track of the activities in this island up to, and including, the present day. While the scope of this book does not include an in-depth treatise on recorded history in Ireland, I believe that, in order to get the most out of your travels in Ireland, you should have at least a basic understanding of the major events and their effects upon the land and culture. Here are some of the salient events, and a brief description, in timeline form. I've also included some earlier events that have historical evidence to help anchor them in the mists of prehistory. The waves of different cultures in the early periods could correspond loosely to the mythological cycle tales. 8000 BCE. The first Mesolithic hunter-gatherers arrive in Ireland, perhaps over a land bridge. 6000 BCE. Neolithic culture rises, with megalithic tombs being built and standing stones being raised. 2000 BCE. Bronze Age culture rises, heralding gold and bronze ornamentation, weapons and tools. This wave may represent the arrival of the Tuatha Dé Danann. 600 BCE. Iron Age culture arrives with a gradual immigration of Celtic-speaking people into Ireland. The societal structure forms to resemble that of other Celtic tribes in mainland Europe and the other isles, including Druids and tribal kings. This last wave may represent the arrival of the sons of Mil from Spain. 0 CE. Ulster cycle tales are traditionally set at this time. 3rd century CE. Fenian cycle tales are traditionally set at this time. Early 5th century CE. Establishment of many of the ruling dynasties of Ireland, including the Uaine, Dalcash, and Oenacta, which held power over much of the land for centuries. 432 CE. Saint Patrick returns to Ireland to start converting the kings, and by proxy, the people, to Christianity. There had been earlier missionaries, but Patrick was the most remembered. 6th century. This was the age of saints and scholars, and was a time of peace, prosperity and learning around the land. Monastic sites spring up around the country, including those founded by St. Columba and St. Brendan. 795 CE. The first Viking raids occur in Ireland. At this point, they are mostly raids on the coastal settlements and up rivers, such as the River Liffey. The Vikings had bases in the Scottish Isles and the Isle of Man to conduct these raids. 852 CE. Vikings establish a fortress at Dublin. Ironically, the Vikings began assimilating into the Irish culture. 1014 CE. Battle at Clontarf, in which Brian Boru defeats Mael Morda mac Murchada, which marks the beginning of the decline of Viking power in Ireland. Several settlements, such as Wexford, Waterford, and Dublin, were established by the Vikings and still retained a high Viking population. They continued to intermarry into Irish families. 1171 CE. Having been asked several times for help against a rival by Dermot mac Murchada, Henry II of England lands his forces at Waterford, signaling the beginning of the Anglo-Norman influence and power in Ireland. Richard Strongbow de Clare, Earl of Pembroke, and the barons of the Welsh Marches came and married Dermot's daughter, Aoife. 15th and 16th centuries. Various rebellions against Anglo-Norman/English power occur, with varying levels of success due to Irish patriotism and English apathy. 1540s. Dissolution of the monasteries and the Reformation. Due to the power of the Act of Supremacy, Henry VIII was given the authority over the churches in England and Wales, and he used this power to disband monasteries and abbeys, as well as smaller churches and friaries. He then appropriated their lands and incomes for his own use. While in Ireland, he technically only had power over the area known as the Pale, the immediate area around Dublin. He passed legislation into the Irish Parliament to allow the dissolution to the rest of the island. This dissolution had a limited effect, as local landowners tended to help the local churches from complete dissolution. 17th century. Penal laws were created in order to keep the Irish Catholics under control and to accept the Anglican Church, and to ensure that only those of the Anglican Church wielded any power in the government or communities. These laws barred the Irish Catholics from holding land, serving in the army, taking office, speaking the native language, or marrying. Catholics had to pay a fee for missing Anglican Church services, and while tacitly tolerated, Catholic services must be held in private. Later they were outlawed, and the priests arrested when discovered. 1607 CE. The flight of the Earls. The last Irish earls with any power flee Ireland, ceding the power to the English. 1649 to 1650 CE. Cromwell leads an invasion of Ireland to subjugate the island. As a Puritan, he is extremely hostile to the Catholic population, and the campaign is cruel and ruthless, with massacres, religious persecution, and burnt towns. The memory of this time and his activities are still strong in Irish minds. 18th century. More rebellions, failing penal laws and broken agreements with the English. 1798 CE. Irish Rebellion of 1798, or the United Irishmen Rebellion. Inspired by the success of the American Revolutionary War, liberal Anglicans sought common cause with the oppressed Catholic populace to get reform and autonomy from the British government. One of the leaders, Wolfe Tone, traveled to the U.S. and France to elicit assistance. The violence was in concentrated outbreaks, and resulted in many deaths and atrocities, and resulted in stricter oppression. 1801 CE. Acts of Union 1900 passed. The Kingdom of Ireland is now part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. 1829 CE. Catholics are now permitted to sit in Parliament. 1845 to 1851 CE. Great Irish Famine. Two-thirds of the potato crop is destroyed by a blight that turns the potatoes into black sludge, earning the nickname of Black 47 for the third year of the blight. Since the introduction of the potato around 1570 by Sir Walter Raleigh, the English had changed much of the crops over to potato farming, and now Ireland was almost entirely dependent on it. If the English hadn't taken most of the viable crops from the country, it wouldn't have been nearly as disastrous. The blight led to an estimated 1 million dead and 1 million emigrated. 1916 CE. Easter Rising, aka Easter Rebellion. This was the most successful push for independence from England since the 1798 rebellion. The Irish seized key government buildings in Dublin, such as the General Post Office, which became the rebel headquarters. While the rising only lasted 7 days, the execution of its leaders rallied the Irish to the cause. 1919 CE. Declaration of Independence is issued. 1921 to 1922 CE. Irish Civil War, aka Irish War for Independence. A treaty by the Irish Free State is signed with Great Britain, abolishing the Irish Republic of 1919 and making the state part of the British Commonwealth. Michael Collins, who was pro-treaty, and Eamon de Valera, who was anti-treaty, and their followers fight to establish the new form of the Irish state. The pro-treaty group wins. This is when Northern Ireland was established as a separate state. 1937 CE. The new state of Ireland replaces the Irish Free State, though it was not formally declared a republic until 1949. 1969 CE. The Battle of Bogside. The beginning of the Troubles, troops deployed in the streets in Northern Ireland. Riots, violence, assassinations, and other religious unrest lasted until the Good Friday Agreement, signed April 10, 1998. While there are still some people, unfortunately, who believe violence is still the answer, most activists have moved onto the political stage for the rest of the fight of independence for Northern Ireland. 1990 CE. Mary Robinson becomes the first female president of Ireland. 1995 to 2008 CE. Celtic Tiger period of great economic growth. 2007 CE. Celtic Tiger ends with housing bubble burst, bank scandal, and governmental power shift. 2020 CE, Brexit. The negotiations between the EU and Britain fires up worry about the practicalities of a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. While I mentioned just one famine in Ireland, and only a couple rebellions, there were many of both throughout the centuries, as well as plague, internal strife, and other major events. Irish history is one of struggle, conflict, but most of all, survival. While much of this is due to outsiders trying to control the Irish people, such as Vikings, Normans, and English, much of it is also due to internal conflict and bickering among the tribes. The Celts as a whole were never a race that got along great with their neighboring Celts. Warfare has a long and honored tradition in the tribes, and the Irish epitomize that ideal even unto the present. Summary. So, what does this all mean to the traveling tourist? It means the landscape of Ireland, both above and below, whether mist-covered hill or rocky mountain, is steeped in historical and mythical significance. Practically every square meter of this tiny country has something which occurred here, something which made the place special. You can easily form a travel plan to visit, for instance, 5 stone circles in one day, or ancient forts, or burial mounds. You could travel to Royal Ancient Ireland, such as the Hill of Uisneach, the Hill of Tara, Maeve's Tomb, the Grian and Éire. You could go from battle site to battle site, and never run out of places to visit. You could hop from Fairy Hill to Fairy Tree to Fairy Ring. Be creative and find the hidden places, the spots which resonate in your very soul, and the ones which speak to your essence, and enjoy those spots. Do you find peace watching a waterfall, or a sunset over a sea cliff? Perhaps you love seeing the rolling green patchwork of farms, or the endless stone walls on the Éire Islands. Each aspect of this land is brimming with a past which brings more meaning to what you see. This is the Ireland we keep in our heart and our soul. The magical facet. The fair folk. Everyone has heard of fairies, of creatures with supernatural powers to curse, to bless, to find gold, or to cause mischief. Literature and art is full of them. From Shakespeare to contemporary artists Amy Brown or Jasmine Beckett Griffith. Western culture, especially in the U.S., is bred on Disney's Tinker Bell, children's books of flower fairies from Victorian artists, and grim tales of the darker side of these fae folk. In Ireland, fairies, known as the Sidhe, or the good folk, originate from the Tuatha De Danann, the people who immigrated to the island before the sons of Mil. Supposedly full of powers, the Tuatha De Danann could not bear to be near iron, and therefore their superior skills were for naught. Rather than leave the land they loved, they agreed to reside below the earth. For this reason, caves are said to be entrances into their underworld homes. Traces of this legend can be seen in the classic film, Darby O'Gill and the Little People, where Darby is led under a mountain to the fairy king's palace. Ireland has countless portals, be they hills, hawthorn trees, caves, wells, or other sacred places. A more Christianized origin of these creatures claim they are angels which fell to earth before humans resided there. They live beneath the waves or gardens, and while some are evil, others can be helpful, as long as they are treated with respect. While many modern legends show the fairies to be sweet, kind, magical creatures, this is really a Victorian creation. The traditional views in Ireland and Scotland show the Sidhe to be mischievous to the point of cruelty, a force to be reckoned with. They are not sought out by the wise. In fact, most of the herb and spell lore of an almost forgotten era is meant to instruct how to keep you from coming to the folks' attention. There are several different types of fairies in Irish lore. The Dullahan is a dark, headless horseman who calls for the dead. He may be the origin of the Headless Horseman legends. There are also related legends of the Dark Hunt, who collects the dead on dark and stormy nights. The Puka is greatly feared in Ireland. He can take many forms, but often a sleek, dark horse with yellow eyes, scattering livestock and trampling crops. Livestock which won't produce eggs or milk are thought to have been terrorized by the Puka. Changelings are sickly fairy children who have been exchanged for healthy human children. This creature creates havoc and drains all the good luck from a family, and usually dies quickly. Sometimes these children are disguised older fairies or enchanted blocks of wood, but their true nature eventually becomes evident. A bit of iron on the baby's clothes or in the crib is thought to prevent the human baby from being stolen. The Grogok are half-human, half-fairy creatures covered in hair with bad hygiene. They live wild and may help with planting or chores for a jug of cream and have great fear of the clergy. The Banshee or Fairy Woman is a spirit who screeches when someone is about to die, someone usually associated with a particular family. Often, she is seen as a hag or an older woman washing by the river. Often the stream will be red with the blood of the dying or dead. Some families claim to have their own banshee who follows them from generation to generation. Leprechauns are perhaps the best known of the Irish fairies. They are small men who make shoes and drink poaching Irish moonshine. They have treasure and will only reveal it if tricked. This legend has been twisted and told so many times in modern culture, it's difficult to find what the traditional legend may have been. The Cluricaun is a related creature, though more sinister. It steals, borrows, or sickens livestock and crops, and generally creates mayhem wherever it goes. The Merrow is a mermaid or merman, extremely beautiful, tempting, and not very friendly to humans. Some are Selkies, who appear as seals unless someone steals their sealskin cloak, trapping them in human form. These Selkies are said to be excellent mothers and wives but will quickly return to the sea if she finds her cloak, leaving her children on the land without a second thought. Sometimes there is a time limit to their human form. 7 years is a common time in tales. While most modern Irish will laugh at you when you ask them if they believe in the Sidhe, or the Fae folk, they will, nonetheless, refuse to do something they know to anger these non-existent creatures. As an example, there was a highway project to build a road in County Clare in 1999. The path of the road was to go through an area in which grew a lone hawthorn tree. No Irishman would dig up this tree, and eventually, the government was forced to divert the highway away from the tree to preserve it. While I was in Ardara in County Donegal, drinking a pint of cider and chatting with the pub owner and her son, who was old enough to be tending bar, I mentioned this story. The son had no idea of the significance of the hawthorn tree as an entrance to the world of the she, but his mother was adamant about it. "Have I taught you nothing? You never want to disturb a lone hawthorn tree." Fairy superstitions and beliefs. They are easily offended. Evidently, you shouldn't call them fairies out loud, as they hate this name. The wee folk, the she, the fair folk, the other crowd, or even them, are all preferable names. It is said the last harper of Ireland, Tullow O'Carolan, fell asleep on a fairy mound and received the gift of fairy music. Hawthorn trees, unusual hills, rings of mushrooms, some glades, forts, and lone trees are sacred. Disturb them or fall asleep near them at your peril. Never build your house on a fairy path. Set 4 posts at the corner of the site overnight. If they are still there the next morning, you should be safe. If you offend a fairy, you may be hit by a fairy dart. This causes severe swelling in the hands or feet. The cure is an ointment made from unsalted butter and herbs, and extraction of the dart. Splinters are often seen as fairy darts. Do not refuse a fairy what they ask. The rest of them will demand retribution, and your family may be cursed for generations. A pair of shovels across the mouth of a grave keeps out fairies. This is still seen today. Sometimes humans are brought to the fairy palace. Often, they return to the human world, only to long to go back. Sometimes they die in the longing. If you do go to a fairy palace or land, and you wish to return home, eat or drink nothing, or you will be stuck there. Many ancient tales of the fairies were collected by Lady Francesca Speranza Wilde, Oscar Wilde's mother, in 1887. Also, there are many tales by William Butler Yeats. I greatly enjoyed the book, The Red-Haired Girl from the Bog, A Landscape of Celtic Myth and Spirit, by Patricia Monaghan, as she delves into some fairy experiences she had on her travels. She writes of the mysticism in the land, and the ability of every person to discover it for themselves. In your travels, be sure to honor the fair folk, even if you don't truly believe in them. It never hurts to be safe, right? It is best to keep an open mind on the subject of the other world. Don't walk through the fairy rings of mushrooms on a green plain. Don't mess with the lone hawthorn tree. And don't dare fall asleep in a stone circle. If you feel a need to appease the she, leave out an offering for them. A bit of fruit, some milk, a lovely stone or a flower. If you've lost something, they may be persuaded to return it, if given sufficient gifts. Being respectful is important for people of all sorts, whether above the ground or below it. Keep in mind that these beliefs are part of a living tradition. They aren't just cutesy things to play around with, they are a native religion. Please, treat the legends with respect. Should you be curious, a great resource on this living tradition is Laura O'Brien, a native teacher in Irish spirituality at Irish Pagan School. The mystical facet. Gods and saints. Ireland was a pagan land before the 5th century and a mostly Christian land after this time. Throughout this period of time, miracles, mystical battles, gods, and saints saturated the land and history with spiritual magic. The ground itself seems spiritual as you walk along its emerald slopes, soaking in centuries of curses and blessings, belief, and power. I shall not make any judgment as to whether the pagan beliefs or the Christian beliefs are more correct. Proselytizing is not the purpose of this book. This is up to each individual to decide. I shall present the myriad aspects of the land and allow the reader to take what wisdom and interest they wish from them. Gods. The Celtic pantheon is rather nebulous, as many tribes held their own beliefs. The Irish Celts were no different, but there are particular gods who were more commonly accepted. Most of them began as mythical or historical characters in the sagas of the mythological cycle, part of either the Firbolg or the Tuatha De Danann, and morphed into gods over the ages of oral tradition. They assigned aspects of nature to the divine and gave a personality to many aspects of nature. The Annals of the Four Masters had this passage. Éire took oaths by the sun, and the wind, and all the elements, to the Leinster men, he would never come against them after setting him at liberty. The version in the lower Nahudri is: Éire swore by the sun and moon, the water and the air, day and night, sea and land, he would never again, during life, demand the Borromean tribute of the Leinster men. Crom Cruach. Also known as Crom, Crumcruach, Tsincruach, the bleeding head, or the crooked one of the mound. He is known as the great creator, the head of all gods. However, he does not have a very fatherly aspect, and is greatly feared. Perhaps he is more akin to the Greek concept of chaos, the entity of void before order was created and imposed upon the universe. A common representation of Crom is a golden figure surrounded by 12 stone figures, perhaps other gods. Saint Patrick was said to have destroyed the stone images with a sledgehammer. An old reference to Crom has been recorded in Ogham letters or ancient Druidic writing, thus translated, and it Cruach was and 12 idols of stone around him, and himself of gold. In the old book Dinsiankis we read thus of Crom, to whom they sacrificed the firstborn of every offspring, and the firstborn of their children. He is definitely associated with human sacrifice, in exchange for good crops and milk from cows. Danu is the mother goddess. The Tuatha De Danann are, literally translated, the children of Danu. She is a mysterious figure and does not appear as an active figure in the tales of adventure and war, as many others were. She is simply the mother of all. Her name is reflected in the Dan River in Russia and the Danube, which passes through or touches the borders of 10 countries, primarily in Romania. The Irish believed she is the creator of the earth, and rivers of life flowed from her womb. Her breasts are the mountains. There are, in fact, a couple of mountains in County Kerry called the Paps of Danu. The Dagda. He is known as the good god, the fatherly aspect of the divine pantheon. While Crom was more of a shadowy figure, the Dagda was very real and present in the tales of the Tuatha De Danann. His feats of strength, diplomacy, and eating were legendary. Some say he was the son of Danu, while others say he was her father or husband. He is the protector of the Irish tribes, and well-loved. He wields a great club which could kill 9 men at once, but the other end could bring life back to the dead or injured. He also has a magical cauldron, which is ever full of food. He has a magical harp which could order the seasons. He is associated with 2 pigs, one ever growing and the other ever roasting, the fruitfulness of the land, and justice for the people of Ireland. Unlike most Irish gods, the Dagda is often portrayed with very human characteristics. Oafish, crude, and sometimes comical. Despite this, he was High King after Nuada of the Silver Arm was injured in battle and led the Tuatha De Danann in battle against the Fomor. The Morrigan. She is also known as Morrigu, is a classic triple goddess, with varying names. The most common set is Bab, Macha and Nemain, together known as the Morrigan. She is known by many other names and appears in many of the Tuatha De Danann tales as a crow, a cow, or a wolf. It is thought the Morrigan's breasts fed the other gods, and she is one of the wives of the great Dagda. She is associated with prosperity, strife, sovereignty, death, war and motherhood. During a battle of the Tuatha De Danann against the Fomor, she breaks the fighting with a battlefield poem, and then chants another celebrating the victory and prophesying the end of the world. Her role often has premonitions of a warrior's death, and she is perhaps associated with the Banshee for this reason. She is not a goddess to be scorned or rejected, as Cuchulainn discovers, nor is she kindly or sweet. Bridget. Also seen as Bridget, she has morphed from goddess to Christian saint quite seamlessly. She is associated with February 1st, St. Bridget's Day or Candlemas, and represents the light showing spring the way back from winter. This day is also known as the pagan holiday of Imbolc. She is the daughter of the Dagda and has 2 sisters of the same name, another triple goddess. She is a healer, a smith, and a poet. She is associated with flames. She is a protector of childbirth and rules over high places. There was a 1,000-year-old shrine to her which holds an ever-burning fire, guarded by first priestesses and then nuns, in Kildare. It was extinguished a couple of times throughout history, by Henry VIII, and by Henry of London, Archbishop of London, but was relit by others, and the tradition continues to this day. Bridget has many holy wells dedicated to her, one of the largest at Kildare, which has a statue of her holding a sacred flame and a wishing tree, or clutie tree. Tradition asks you to tie a piece of ribbon or cloth on the tree, then make a wish. As this bit disintegrates from the tree, your wish is released to the goddess. A Bridget's cross is made of rushes or straw in a square-shaped cross and is hung in the home for protection from evil spirits. This is now a Christian symbol, but probably came from a pagan sunwheel, and was kept because of the cross shape. There are many crosses in pre-Christian European lands, by the way. The Great Stone Circle at Callanish, on the Isle of Lewis, Scotland, is in the form of a great even-armed cross. This was a sun symbol to the ancients and held sacred to many people. Éire is considered a crone goddess, embodying wisdom, magic, and cruelty. She is portrayed as an old woman, the Veiled One, or the Death Huggy. She is a guardian of the underworld, holding winter as her season and earth as her element. She may represent deified ancestors. She is also present in Scottish and Manx mythology, and predates the arrival of the Celtic gods. She pairs with Bridget, ruling the cold half of the year while Bridget rules the warm half. If the weather is nice on Bridget's day, it means the Cailleach is able to go out and gather more firewood, and winter will last longer. If the weather is foul, then the Cailleach is asleep, and winter is almost over. After the grain harvest in the fall, a farmer should make a corn dolly, which represents the Cailleach, from the last sheaf of the crop. This dolly is cared for each year, feeding the hag all winter, and then burned in the Belton fires. On the cliffs of Maher, there is an outcropping called Hag's Head, named for the Cailleach, and there is a passage tomb called Slieve na Caillead as possible Sheila na Gigs. Figurative carvings of women displaying exaggerated vulva are derived somehow from the legends of the Cailleach. The Ring of Beara may also be named after here, as the Cailleach Vara. Lu was the Shining One, the sun god. He is also portrayed of having good humor, and perhaps even a trickster. Thunderstorms are thought to be the battle between Luff and Balor. It was prophesied Balor's grandson would kill him, so Balor, of Fulmar, kept his daughter, Ethniu, in a tower. Of course, this never works in legends, and she is found by a man of the Tuatha De Danann, falls in love, and conceives. When she gives birth, Balor takes the triplets to have them drowned, but one falls out of the bag, who turns out to be Luff, and is fostered by a smith, a bard, and many others, and becomes a master of all crafts. He then has to prove himself at the Tuatha court, and becomes the advisor to High King Nuada, Chief Alum of Ireland. He helps them rise and defeat their Fulmar overlords. Luff had a spear which is magical, as well as a sling stone which kills Balor, his grandfather, thus fulfilling the prophecy. He also has a horse who could ride over land and sea, furnished to him by Manannan MacLyre, god of the sea, and a coracle called Wavesweeper, which would carry as many people as it needed to. Lugnasad, the pagan festival held around the first harvest, or August 1st, is named for him. He started the festival in honor of his foster mother, Tailtiu. Lunasa is now the Irish name for the month of August. Saints. While the Irish, being a strongly Catholic nation, honor many saints, there are three which stand out as being patron saints of Ireland. The obvious one is Saint Patrick, but others are Saint Bridget and Street Columba. Saint Patrick. Patrick is not, according to Roman records, Irish. He is the son of a Roman deacon and grandson of a priest, living in what is believed to be modern-day Wales. He is captured at age 16 and taken as a slave to Ireland to work as a shepherd. He is evidently not very religious before this, perhaps even a bit of a delinquent, but found solace in faith during his lonely days and nights on the hills. When he does escape, after 6 years, it is thanks to a vision he has. He finds a ship and returns home. The escapee follows his new religious path, to study in Rome. Patrick then has a vision he should go back to Ireland and help them become Christian. He concentrates on converting the kings, believing that eventually the peasantry will follow. He is moderately successful, but as Ireland was a seething mass of independent kingdoms at the time, it likely took a great deal of time and effort, traipsing across a forest-covered land of tiny, warring kingships. He is based in Armagh, in today's Northern Ireland. We've all heard the legends where St. Patrick banishes the snakes from Ireland. According to biological archaeology, there have never been snakes on the island. However, this is commonly understood to be an allegory for the conversion process, as the pagan religion and druidry are often associated with the snake-like Celtic knotwork. Another legend. Patrick used the shamrock to demonstrate how the Trinity is really one entity, and thus giving rise to the shamrock as being a symbol of Christian Ireland. The national symbol is the harp. There is nothing in his writing of this practice, but the shamrock had been sacred in pagan times, as a representation of the triple goddess, which I find rather ironic. Patrick was not, as commonly believed, the first Christian missionary to pagan Ireland. Palladius had been sent there beforehand to administer to already existing Christian communities, and St. Kieran lived there in the latter half of the 4th century. However, they laid a basic groundwork Patrick could then use for his own conversions later. Saint Bridget. As we saw earlier, Bridget is originally a goddess in Irish pagan belief, and she is successfully morphed into a saint by the Christianized Irish. There is probably at least 1, if not 11, historical figures who lend their history to the saint's story. She is known to be an early Irish Christian nun and abbess in the late 5th and early 6th centuries. She established many monastic settlements, but she is most widely associated with her settlement in what is today's town of Kildare in the heart of County Kildare. Her feast day is February 1st, which is also the pagan celebration of Imbolc. On this day, town locals hold memorial events, and special masses are said in the church which bears her name. Some sources list her as having been from Dundalk, and her father, Dubhthach, a king of Leinster, was a pagan. Her mother was a Christian Pict named Bracha, who had been a slave baptized by St. Patrick. Other legends say Bridget is the daughter of a druid, and threw up any sustenance he fed her, so she had to be nourished directly from a cow. She is accredited to many miracles, including the healing of leprosy, curing 2 dumb sisters, and magically restoring a stock of butter she had given to the poor from her mother's supply. She also is said to have cursed a nun who withheld her charity from lepers. Rare as it was in medieval society, she appears to have been a woman of some power, the head abbess in Ireland, in charge of many religious centers throughout the land. Bridget founded a school of art, metalwork, and illumination, and perhaps helps create the Book of Kildare, an illuminated manuscript similar to the Book of Kells. Bridget is particularly associated with Kildare, and as mentioned in the gods section, has a holy well there, a statue, and a wishing tree. She also has a sacred flame dedicated to her which has been maintained almost continuously for over 1,000 years. There are other holy wells throughout Ireland dedicated to her. You will often see a little sign pointing the way to one, hidden in a fold of the earth, or under a tree. There is one near the hill of Tara, for instance, and another near the cliffs of Maher. Take the time to seek out the holy wells, and perhaps make a dedication, a prayer, or a wish. Bridget is definitely a very motherly saint or goddess, whatever your beliefs, and she takes good care of her people. Perhaps if she had been a man, she would have become the patron saint of Ireland in Patrick's stead. Saint Columba. In Irish, his name is Colum Chill, or Dove of the Church. He is an Irish missionary who is credited with bringing Christianity from Ireland to the Picts in Scotland during the 6th century. He is also a king's son, and a great-great-grandson of Niall of the Nine Hostages, an Irish high king of the Uainial clan. As the younger son of a noble, Columba is educated in the monastery. He becomes a monk and then a priest. He is said to have founded several monasteries, including ones at Kells, Derry, and Swords. He argues over a psalter he had copied, and this dispute ends in a battle in which many men were killed. He is threatened with excommunication, but instead is exiled from Ireland. This exile finds him on the Isle of Iona in Scotland, where he founds another monastery with 12 companions. This place remains a holy site to this day. He becomes a diplomat, his monastery a center of literacy, and he visits with the Pictish king, Brede, though he did not convert him. Columba is recorded as having been one of the first to see the Loch Ness Monster, according to his biographer, Adamnan. He performs several miracles, including healing disease, expelling malignant spirits, and calming storms. He eventually returns to Ireland later in life, where he founds yet another monastery, at Doo. Columba is from County Donegal, and there remains today a village called Glencolumcille dedicated to him. Glencolumcille is a wonderful place to visit. In addition to the religious community which still exists, there is a lovely historical village created by a local priest to help the local economy. Several cottages are set up as they would have been in the 1700s, 1800s and 1900s, offering glimpses of village life from these times, complete with hearth tools, bedding, and dishes. Other saints. Of course, there are other saints in Ireland throughout its history. There are far too many to list them all here. However, some others of note, or those I have come across in my travels, include the following. Saint Gobnate. From County Cork, she is associated with Innismore, the largest of the Aran Islands. Saint Brendan the Navigator. From Tralee in County Kerry, Brendan supposedly sails to the Americas 5th or 6th century. Noted explorer, Tim Severin, reads Navigatio Sancti Brendani Abbatis and decides to construct a boat to Brendan's specifications. He uses Brendan's notes and navigational charts and makes the same journey in 1976. Severin's Brendan boat can still be seen today at the Craiganoan Experience in County Clare. St. Fiachra lived in the 7th century and is today associated with gardens. There is a wild garden dedicated to him at the National Stud in Kildare. Saint Oliver Plunkett. Oliver was a 17th-century Roman Catholic Archbishop of Armagh and Primate of all Ireland who was the last victim of the Popish plot and the last Catholic martyr to die at Tyburn. His head is now on display in a glass case in St. Peter's Church in Drogheda, County Louth. The rest of his body was taken to Downside Abbey in England where it remains today. Saint Kevin. Kevin was the son of a nobleman who left his life of privilege to take up Christianity. He lived as a hermit in the Wicklow Mountains where he eventually establishes Ireland's largest and most prolific religious centre at Glendalough in the Wicklow Mountains. Summary. As you can tell, the lines between gods and saints are thin and tenuous in several places throughout the Irish mythology. Celtic Christianity has many pagan aspects, and the pagan tales have been heavily Christianized. I had a wonderful conversation at Bridget's Well in Kildare with a Franciscan monk in 2006. He was there to collect holy water from the well. As we talked about the various pagan aspects of Celtic Christianity, he said they are so entwined it would be impossible to separate them, and no Irishman really wished to. It is part of their cultural identity and faith. Celtic Christianity is very different from Roman Catholic Christianity, and the Irish prefer it this way, it seems. There is, with some exceptions, a gentler feeling to Catholicism in Ireland, perhaps because the conversion from paganism was not done with flame and oppression, but with persuasion and education. Ireland was also a haven of education and literacy through the so-called European Dark Ages, after the fall of Rome and the rampages of the barbarian tribes across the land. These tribes didn't reach Ireland, and the sacred texts, writings, and scrolls were left untouched until the Viking raiders came a few hundred years later. This is why the second half of the first millennium CE, around 500 to 900 CE, was called the Age of Saints and Scholars in Ireland. While there was plenty of intertribal war and struggle, for the most part, Ireland was left alone to prosper, grow, and most of all, learn. Please continue to part 2 to continue listening to this audiobook.